Hello and welcome to Scottish Ancestral Records. I'm Lisa May Young, and hello again to Ken Nisbet. Hello Ken, how are you doing?
Oh, not too bad in this lockdown. Well, waiting to see when they reopen. Obviously, Nicholas Sturgeon's giving us some nice forecast, hopefully to cut by end of April and May. But I don't want to let that stop you doing your family history research. Luckily today we got very good news in that the Kirk Session records have been made available on the Scottish website. But the other big thing, of course, that's going to happen family history this year is going to be hopefully in June, and as far as I know, I haven't heard anything to the contrary, the release of the 1921 census. Now, England and Wales, because they are a bit more strict on that, what they call the actual 100-year rule, referring to the calendar year, that will be available until 2022, and really only for England and Wales. Initially available only on the Find My Past website, because they are the company doing the digitisation. Different Scotland's people got where you're going to find the 1921 census, and it will only be on that website. It won't be on microfilm. It won't be on any of the commercial sites. It will be your standard pricing charge if you want to look at an image. And until obviously the Family History Centre in Edinburgh reopens, and we don't know when that's going to be, we haven't been given any firm dates. I mean, I know libraries may reopen possibly in May and so on, but I know with our building it's not the easiest because they're old buildings, the easiest for the air conditioning numbers. So really certainly hopefully from about halfway through June, we'll have access to the 1921 census. Now, why was it taken in June rather than our standard time of April, which was April, March? Well, the reason was simply down to industrial action, in particular by colliery workers and women. They went on strike in around Easter 1921. I was a feeling that it wasn't a good time to hold the census in that particular year. So really, apart from the census, the 1841 census, which was held here in the summer, it's the first census where the actual date was altered. The 1931 census for Scotland was held at usual time in March and April, and of course there was no 1941 census. I suppose one could also mention that the census that this year's been held in England and Wales. It's the first time since in 1801 that Scotland will have a census held in a different year, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. But I don't think we need to worry about it. In 100 years' time, are we going to be around to having looking at your census return? But somebody did say to me the other day, well, why don't you just simply photocopy or scan the paper copy that you get and then keep it in your family records? And I think that's possibly an excellent idea. But why is it important? Well, obviously the 1921 census was the first census held after the Great War. You're going to find obviously men missing who were killed due to died during the military service. The interesting thing also is that you're going to see a lot of families for the last time, because it was actually in the night between 1921 and 1931. It's approximately estimated that over 400,000 Scots left Scotland. It was one of the biggest periods of migration of all time from Scotland was in the 1920s, mostly down to economic reasons. Obviously, big downturn in industrial work after post the Great War.
I had a granddad that went to Chicago for work.
Yeah, I mean, some people went to work and came back, particularly obviously post the Depression in the late 1920s. So some came back. So just like the £10 bombs, not all of them stayed. So some came back. but I have quite a lot of relatives who migrated to Canada in the 1920s. Canada was a very popular way, and actually, if you were going to the States, it was cheaper to go to Canada, and then, particularly if you're going to work, for example, at the Ford and
Yeah, that's what I did. Yeah.
yes, you sailed into Halifax, and then you took the train down over the border. So your migration records should appear in both in the Canadian and certainly the Crown Border Archives, and then possibly if you got naturalised in the naturalisation records that are super records, mostly available, it has to be said, on Ancestry, is probably the best site for naturalisation records. So it differs very much from the 1911 census. Every census is unique. They have their own sets of questions which they ask. And so let's think about some of the questions that were dropped, questions that were asked. Well, what did they drop? Well, they dropped the medical questions. So sometimes what we would call the politically incorrect questions. You're not going to find the word imbecile, idiot, blind, deaf, or dumb. And one of the reasons they felt was that this was not necessarily answered accurately because parents were sometimes reluctant to identify their child as having certain medical conditions, possibly.
Absolutely.
Failing that child would then be possibly compulsively taken into care, which didn't happen really in the 19th century. And, if you have a child with problems, they might well be left at home, but certainly in the 20th century, almost feeling they should be taken away from the family. So sometimes families decided that no, that they weren't. The other big thing, which you will find a difference between the 1911 census is, unfortunately, because of space on the pages, they drop the fertility question, so you're not going to find the number of children born to the marriage, which of course is a very useful set of information in there. So what changes do we see? Well, on the 1921 census, the age is not just shown just in years; it should be shown in years and months. So that should perhaps give you a more accurate date, perhaps of birth, but partly because sometimes, as you know, with family history, we always say plus or minus for the year. Well, if your child's 12 years and 12 months, 11 months, you might think, well, hang on, well, that's probably going to be May, so on. You can reckon it's month of birth, and possibly with it getting more accurate on the year. If an individual was aged over 15, they had to indicate whether they were single, married, or divorced. Now, yes, up to the latter part of the 1920s, it was still perfectly legal for a 12-year-old girl to get married in Scotland, but I have never come across a case in all my 50 years of doing family.
That's reassuring.
50 years of doing family history of girls that young getting married. I've seen 16-year-olds and possibly even 15-year-olds, but I've certainly never come across an age of a young girl getting married. But they had to say that they were single. Now, they are aware that the divorce figures are slightly underestimated because folk, again, because of social status, didn't always admit to being divorced, because really up until the 1930s, if a divorce is contested, you're going to find a report in the local newspaper. And usually with the proverbial derogatory remarks as to that person's addiction to alcohol or swearing, or people didn't always put that. The question was asked. Then what's more interesting than they asked was, if a child was aged under 15, they had to indicate if both parents were alive, if the father was dead, or if the mother was dead, or if both were dead, or both were deceased. Now, you can possibly kind of figure out if the child is under 15 and it says the father's deceased, and the child whose age was born prior to the Great War, or about the Great War, you might reasonably possibly think, well, he's a Great War casualty. So certainly that information is going to be useful.
That's the history records telling us a story.
It is indeed, yes. It's going to see whether they are attending school or another educational establishment. That used to be in the employment column. I mean, it used to have, a lot of people used to get confused. They looked at the employment column and it said scholar. Well, scholars obviously not in employment. So that there will be a separate column in a bit, which did appear in the 1861 census as the number of children that were at school. In the employment columns, you have to give the name of your employer. So it's not simply of saying, I labourer. You've got to actually put your employer's name. Now, in England and Wales, they also had to put their employer's address. That didn't apply in Scotland. In Scotland, what they asked was whether an individual was entitled to benefits under the National Insurance Health Act. So, in other words, unemployment benefit, basically. So that whereas in England, what they do in England and Wales is if you were a domestic servant, you wouldn't put your employer's address if you were working at their home address. But so for my English relatives, I might find the name of the address of the company which is working in Scotland. I might simply put the employer's address. Well, the first thing obviously I'm going to say is look at trade directories, look at post office directories from the National Library of Scotland, a site which are free to use. That's going to give you their address. Anyway, if you've got your employer's name, you need to find their address, then possibly Google that company or look at archives, see if archives, Glasgow University Business School, for example, for some shops and certainly
newspapers.
And newspapers and so on. It is going to be very helpful. Then there was a column that had to show the number and ages of living children or stepchildren under 16 also had to be shown. So we're going to have additional columns. Yes, it would be great if the fertility question had continued, but one can understand that for reasons of space. Population, which, while majority are literate and probably could fill out the forms on their own, not everybody could. We all know how complicated the census form can be, but even a modern one, and we can see it when we've got to think about the questions. That people have the time. Please don't do what they're doing in England at the moment, which is fill out the census form online in advance of the date, which seems to be a big issue centre order. It's supposed to be a particular day, not 2 weeks in advance of the day.
That's a plan in 2021 in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, in 2022, as I say, the Scottish Census. Now, I do know that for the English and Welsh census is released next year for 1921, as I say. I mean, they'll have the similar columns, although that they won't have the National Health Insurance column, that will have the address of the employer. But it will have also all the soldiers who were in overseas bases. So if you've got Scottish regiments in India or RAF cantonments, which were actually in Iraq by then, the RAF were in Iraq in 1921. And then
Really?
Well, yes. Well, if you think of the after the Turkish Empire collapsed during the First World War, when the Turks were defeated by the Allies, then we had bases in what is now Jordan and in Iraq, in particular. We bombed insurgents in Iraq in the 1920s. So you'll find RAF bases in Iraq. So you're going to, and you're of course Scottish regiments in India. Not so many in other parts of the global empire, if you want to, but you're certainly got Scottish regiments in India. We're going to find a lot of this useful. The census is always that great snapshot. It's a vital tool. It does tell us a story.
There's quite a bit of excitement about this census, isn't there?
Oh yes,
Among history family researchers.
Well, there is. I mean, I experienced, and I wrote very much the guidebook. If you look at a lot of sites, it was myself that wrote the guides to the 1911 census, the one on the SARS website. And I know various family societies have followed it since I didn't know this. I think even the National Archives did it. I wrote. I had the privilege then of seeing it in advance. I won't see it in advance this time. So, like you, like everybody, fortunately, I haven't been put on part-time furlough. I'm going to have the opportunity, hopefully. Well, I might take the view off. I can certainly see me immediately spending some credits. It's going to be the first census for me where I'll actually see all four grandparents, because my granny, my mum's side, was born in 1913. So she didn't appear, of course, in the 1911 census, but the 1921 census, I would be married, because my grandparents, my dad's side, didn't get married until 1923, and my mum's side to the 1933. But I'll find all four grandparents. I'll immediately, right now, probably one or two little articles coming out already, but I'll be able to have more programs that I've played around with it to an extent. But it's something that every 10 years we know is going to happen. It's something that we might find information that we haven't previously had. For example, as some of the other children, because as you know, the Scottish index it's not till 1929 that you actually have the mother's maiden name. So you get this other batch of children that were born between 1911 and 1921, whose names that you haven't found, particularly if it's a common surname. If it's an uncommon surname, you might have found them already, but always another poor kid that he had on leave, between his army leave, also military leave. I suspect I'll be adding several 100 names. It's a great. The fact that they've got the Kirkshire records out the way they're on is the big next thing. What comes after that? Well, we'll see 1931 census in another 10 years' time. But I'm sure there will be more stuff coming up. Certainly, church records in Scotland's people website possibly more. Well, just wait and see what happens on that.
And the more that are free records that are available, the better.
Yeah, I mean, always take a look. Have a look at, for example, what Family Search.
It's a terrific website, isn't it? Family Search.
What Family Search, for example. Recently, I've got a lot of South African records, and they're free to look at. The statutory records of South Africa. Some of them are Matabele and Afrikaans, but I don't think Google Translate necessarily quotes with historical PDFs, but some of them you can kind of break through, and some of them are in English, so depending on the particular state, some of them are in English. There's always worth having a look. There's always stuff. Remember that most records, for example, some of the Irish records, they just move forward a year. Free stuff. Have a look. Thing on next year. It's the same with the Scottish people website. Will move forward. And obviously, what we have seen during lockdown, for example, if you take the Scottish people website, we've seen that the mother's maiden name is in the death index. It's really up to about 1881 now. Mm-hmm. It makes it, that again is something that I would recommend that people do have a look at. It can perhaps find you children of a relative, and that might help confirm names and so on. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, obviously, that's hopefully that might be extended. I hope what I've given you tonight is a kind of brief overview of what we will expect in the 1920 census.
And as usual, a lot of great free resources that our listeners can take advantage of.
Oh, yeah. I mean, go out, enjoy. one hopes that we'll have good weather and that we can all get out and see our families again. But or go around cemeteries and churchyards. Family historians. Family history is something that is a hobby that I don't think I'll ever stop doing. Just carry on doing it. And,
Am I right in saying you've been doing your family history for the base probably well over 40 years?
Well, at least, yes, I started when I was at school. And so having just turned 60 last year, I started it when I was 17. I joined my first family history society in 1978. I've never stopped. But I do like the social history as well as just yes, I love doing the family trees, and the bigger the family tree, the better. But and certainly D&E's making a great deal of difference. But I do enjoy doing the social history, and there's a lot more of that coming on, particularly.
And I think in the last year we've all told a lot more stories and spoken. There's a lot of oral history, I think, in the last year. So in terms of your social history.
Yes, I mean, for example, if you've got relatives who served in the Great War, you never know that they might have unbeknownly told their story to the Imperial Ones in college. Well, they might have diaries. I mean, not all families are aware. Now, this is an English officer, but somebody, this is a book I got the other day, and this chap, relatives, the researcher, the lady said, "Oh, I've got a few letters. There's over 200 letters from the Great War."
Wow.
And this is a recording. This is a transcript of all these. Now, it's an English service battalion, but and it's up to 1917, but it's full of social history. So you never know what stuff is out there. Just keep looking. Don't give up. Never give up.
Even if you have to wait for the census, it's there.
Even if you have to wait for the census, even if you have to wait for that obscure will, or for example, as you say, I've been going through the Kirk Session records for St. Ninians today in Stirlingshire, and they make frequent references to layers and people purchasing layers, and it says, "I'm purchasing this layer," or "I'm taking this layer over," and this layer, and this is in the late 1790s, but my grandfather bought this layer in the 1725s, 1720s. Now, you may find that the parish registers don't go back that far, but there in the Kirk Session is giving the reference to the great-grandfather or the grandfather. So
amazing stuff, isn't that?
Yes, the little dotted line. The only thing I will say with the Kirk Session records, everyone, is they're not name indexed. You are going to, it's a bit like old-fashioned genealogy, folks. You have to go through page by page. Yes, the year where you find it. Do read the help pages. I would insist that people do read. Or listen to the Scottish Indexes talks, for example, that Emma Maxwell is doing. And also sign up to SAF's conference, which is free. If you haven't, I think Lisa should probably have already signed up for that. That's free this year. It's online, it's Zoom, it's an all-day conference coming up. And Emma Maxwell from Scottish Indexes will be talking about use of Kirk Session records. And they can be incredible. They're for classes, some of which are given by myself. So, enjoy yourselves, folks.
And we will be back again soon.